Thank you, Dr. Ashfield. I did come here on Monday, and I was followed by a dark cloud. It's gone away, and it's a clear day. It's a beautiful day, and I'm looking forward to talking with you about some things close to my heart. I'm old school. John asked me if I wanted to use a PowerPoint, and I'm a chalk and talk person, so you'll have to look at my face. I won't be hiding behind a darkened space here with everybody's attention focused there. This morning I'll be perhaps more formal than in the afternoon session. We'll hear some other speakers. We'll have a panel discussion, and in all events, hopefully many questions and answers so that this can become interactive. But having said old school, I'll start with what I've prepared to say for you this morning and hope that it will lead to some discussion. By the way, I'm going to make a distinction between hard psychologists and soft psychologists. Hard psychologists being folks who are very much oriented to numbers and statistical studies. I appreciate all of that, but my clinical background has made me a rather soft psychologist, which is to say I probably want to appeal as much to feeling as I want to the mind, although, of course, the two can't be separated, can they? Well, this morning's session, "The boy is father of the man," is a quotation. Most research on males has focused on how the expectations of manhood determine the course a boy's life will take and what boyhood should mean. In my work, I have looked at things the other way around to try to understand the man in terms of boyhood. Hence the title of my talk, which quotes words written many years ago by the British novelist and essayist William Makepeace Thackeray, "The boy is father of the man." It comes from one of his essays in a selection called The Four Georges, in which he discusses some of the British monarchs. Well, you will see that the pivotal figure in all this, however, is the father, both metaphoric and real. What is ultimately at stake, however, is adjusting our way of looking at boys, chiefly to ensure that their importance and well-being regain the attention they require, and for good reason. My theoretical interests point to a unique way of looking at boyhood, but my concern is with boys' lives. And so today I will look at how boys have been affected psychologically by certain important social changes. I've come a long way to speak to you with great pleasure, and so I hope you will indulge me and allow me to have your attention for a fair stretch of time this morning. This afternoon, I promise you, there will be a lot of time to talk back and forth. The site of boyhood, where it comes to have meaning, is the family. In recent years, all children have been affected by changes in the status, structure, and dynamics of what came to be the fundamental child-rearing institution of the Western world, what we have come to call the nuclear family or household. As we will see, boys are in a more vulnerable position than girls, in my view, as a result of these changes. And as a consequence, what boys mean to us has been compromised. Yes, I think that boys are culturally important. Today I can only hint at why I believe this is the case. Instead, I will look at the precarious situation boys now find themselves in and why such a thing has come to pass. First, then, in several parts. First, I will sketch some of the features of boyhood, a phenomenon that has come into prominence during the past few decades, as you know, but is not well understood, especially for its broader cultural significance. Next, I will assess the current condition of the nuclear family, since that is where the meaning of boyhood, manhood, and fatherhood unfolds. Finally, I will discuss the impact of the missing father on boys' lives. This is the most ominous feature of the destabilization of the nuclear family, in my view, and reveals the part boys play in the family and culture. I will also anticipate this afternoon's session, my afternoon session, and hint at what we must do for boys at this time. So the first part, something on boyhood. Children come in two basic flavors, boys and girls, and how different they are in anatomy, physiology, initial sensitivities and tendencies, inclinations and tastes, ways of using space, and styles of relating and playing. Males have evolved to be distinctive, as unmistakable in their basic way of self-presentation as females are. Their singular way of being implies a certain embodied experience of the world. This predicts that boys will react differently than girls to important cultural changes, such as the weakening of the nuclear family. So what are the unique characteristics of boys? Now, the picture of boys that follows is somewhat fanciful, but I hope it will prove to be evocative in setting the stage for showing why boys are more vulnerable to the major changes in the nuclear family, and that is, of course, the disappearance of the father in contemporary Western culture. Boys are like cats. Let's call one of them Felix. Felix is never fully socialized by the time he is driven into manhood, something we know he resists cross-culturally, but is taught in every culture to vaunt and to pretend to want. As cats have done with human beings in general, Felix domesticates us, seducing us to participate in his somewhat feral world and on his own terms. I think anyone who's been a parent might recognize some of this already. Now, we have never quite found a place for the boy in civilized society until now. But this is precisely what's important about him, as it turns out, too. His marginal status is legendary, from Huck Finn to Holden Caulfield and their current incarnations. Felix likes to play a lot. His games always seem to have something of the chase and capture theme about them. He prefers jumping from place to walking about, and a consequence of his innate hyperkineticism, which has been documented from infancy on in child observation studies. Felix is inclined to seek high perches from which to observe us. He thereby gives the impression of wanting to dominate the scene. But in fact, he moves to higher ground because it is a safer place to be for a creature of his temperament and vulnerabilities. His anatomical peculiarities are contradictory. Some are assertive, while others prompt defensiveness in him. Felix has a caudal, tail-like appendage that he often enough forgets as part of his body. Early in life, he senses it will have an important part to play later on, since he is taught to overvalue it. But he is also told to be ashamed of it, keep it under covers. A very young Felix must be discouraged from displaying his penis. Sometimes it seems to have a life of its own. He often touches it. Sometimes it seems to trouble him. It rarely fails to get him into trouble, and that seems to be the extent of what is predictable about it. Now, another part of his anatomy, however, prompts defensiveness. Like his eyes, his testes are really internal organs exposed to the elements and susceptible to painful injury. Being so equipped, Felix becomes mastered by what psychologists call compensation. This consequence of his anatomical distinctiveness has been vastly underappreciated, I think. What it means is that Felix tries to appear that nothing can hurt him. This is the compensatory move, defensive. Felix has tucked claws and soft paws. Which feature better symbolizes his true nature? Neither, really. When he feels threatened, which seems to happen often, he displays his claws. But much of the time, it is only for bluff and show, and they are withdrawn as quickly as they were displayed and deployed. On the other hand, his wariness is more constant. Like a cat, Felix sleeps when he is understimulated, yet he is hypervigilant. He feigns boredom, but is always alert. Felix comes alive at night when everyone else is going to bed. And his inner alarm clock, and this is empirically certified, his inner alarm clock is set to go off about an hour later in the morning than the one found in girls, which has consequences for things that happen in classrooms, especially during the elementary school years. Felix has what owners of real felines know as cat attacks, during which, without warning, he runs about as if inspired by dreams of danger. He makes adventure where there is no need for it. This is because, like his body, his imagination is overactive. As a result, he is, one might say, compulsively creative, perhaps again compensating for his inability, in this case, to grow new life in his body. Sadly, this excess of interest and rapidly shifting attention from person to person, place to place, activity to activity, are often mistakenly read as lack of focus. Felix does not seem to take anything seriously except his play. He works at things playfully. He is fond of running, throwing, and chasing things. Later, we see this love of movement for its own sake in his passion for skateboarding, riding his bicycle at breakneck speed, making loud music, fiddling heatedly at video games. We are impotent to slow him down unless we drug him into insensibility. We will hear about the consequences of this intervention that has become more and more common in the presentation of Dr. Giardini in a few minutes. You usually cannot interest Felix in anything toward which his curiosity is not already inclined. Learning and squirming are not mutually exclusive for him, a feature not much appreciated in the formal classroom setting. Well, in their research findings, clinicians and social psychologists have confirmed the presence of these features in real boys. So to move from caricature to character and personality, boys are different from girls from the start of life. Their unique way of being in the world causes them to behave differently than girls. More emotionally volatile and physically active from the start, boys undergo a notable series of challenging separations from the womb, the breast, the mother of infancy, and the mother as female, when he makes the move to females other than his mother. While there is an essential continuity for girls from the female as mother to female as woman, in other words, a boy must be separated from his mother in order to refine the female as woman. Here we find the importance of the father, to whom a boy is handed over by his mother for purposes of identifying with him as a male and a man. Boyhood, then, is a stage discontinuous with infancy and in need of a leap in order to land anywhere near manhood. This is the unique critical separation of boyhood. After puberty, a male must again and again convince those around him that he has accomplished it and put away the boy, even as the boy continues to live on in him. Here he is, then, the boy, intensely active, centrifugal, quite insecure, marginally social, hard to tame, defensive at the core in a compensatory way, acquainted more with disconnects than continuities, ludic, playful, inclined to the imaginary and fond of reverie, and allergic to manhood, what the American Fox indigenous peoples call the big impossible. Discovered only a century ago, male adolescence in the technologically developed West has, as a result of the disappearance of clear-cut rites of passage, faded into a lingering, somewhat indeterminate period of extended boyhood, in my view. Boyhood now begins at about age 4 and runs well into the 20s. The familiar boy man on college campuses is iconic of this protracted boyhood. Of course, most young males do not attend college. Are things the same for them, the lads, the guys, the blokes? Yes. They comprise the increasing numbers of young males in the criminal justice system, which sadly is for many of them a more stable household than they have ever known. Those who remain sometimes into their 30s in the house, if not the household in which they were supposed to have grown up, and those who increasingly pass years laboring in meaningless part-time jobs, if there are any to be found. Some marry, but many of these flee an inhospitable situation. For the first time now, all boys, I would say, have something in common. This cuts cross class. Even given these differences of race, ethnicity, and class. When they go out, for example, they meet at the same venues, rock concerts, football matches. When they stay at home, we often find them alone. But whether alone or with a dude or 2 or 3, they are usually in the basement or garage or a small untidy room. Often they are in gangs or other bands of boys there, in musical bands, yes, including well-known pickup rock and roll bands. Some form backyard wrestling leagues. This is a remarkable phenomenon, by the way, that deserves a paper all unto itself. And if there's an opportunity later on, I'd like to tell you a little bit more about what I've discovered following this phenomenon. But boys now also meet in the pseudo-communal cyberspace of the internet, texting, twittering, floating in MySpace, posting to YouTube, and randomly commenting on each other on Facebook. Whether in college, although fewer are there than ever before, waiting to be employable or looking for employment, the oldest boys meet in a world where what it means to be a man is increasingly unclear. Now, what about the nuclear family and the situation as it affects boys? Boyhood is intimately related to the nuclear family, an institution that has been in place for a very long time. In fact, I learned only a few weeks before coming here, in a study published in 2008, when Wolfgang Hack of Adelaide University presented strong evidence that the nuclear family is natural to our species, to Homo sapiens sapiens. There's evidence for it, his group discovered, reaching back thousands of years. Recently, what happens in this social space, however, has altered dramatically. 2 out of 3 boys now grow up in what is a grossly disfigured form of the household. Most of what I have to say is based on first-hand familiarity with the American scene on this matter. But as I've learned, the status of the nuclear family and for boys is in every essential the same here in Australia as it is in the States, New Zealand, Canada, the UK, and everywhere in Europe and the rest of the world where the ethos of the technological West is penetrated. My account may seem reductive in not explicitly referring to the richly nuanced variety of subcultures in these places, but I'm keenly aware of indigenous traditions of custom and language in our countries and how they have affected and been affected by the nuclear family, its dynamics and values. Indeed, it may be that such traditions will come to our rescue. Yet for most boys, the changes that affect them have their source in what's left of the nuclear family, so we have to focus on that. Some claim that this institution is only transforming, but I believe it is in its last days, and soon will be an anachronism. Chiefly because in only a few years, the criteria for casting its cast of characters have been radically revised, and the roles they play have been rewritten. The very notions of wife, husband, child, mother, and above all, father are now contested, and in academia particularly, but also in the media, and for some out of fashion, because not politically correct. Instead, we speak the language of partners, figures, surrogates, donors, We hear of 2 male or 2 female parents responsible for a household. In general, formal and informal, legal and religiously sanctioned liaisons are easily formed and just as easily dissolved. And in the States, 2/3 of our households are now of the single-parent variety, and its head is nearly always the natural mother, who is usually employed full-time for most of the child's early life. Where I teach, we have a daycare center for the surrounding population and for some of our faculty. And we see children dropped off there as early as age 2.5, which is remarkable. And the consequences of which we're not entirely sure what they'll be. But that's a very young age to suddenly be dumped into the arms of strangers. So a great deal of parenting then is necessarily, given that situation of the single-parent family, who's the mom, a great deal of parenting is necessarily and routinely turned over to a changing cast of, for the most part, strangers to the children they are paid to oversee, as au pair or nannies for the wealthy and daycare providers for the rest. Elementary and secondary level schools are called upon to serve as second homes for children through the late teen years, a task for which these institutions were not designed. Public schools are legally charged and empowered to act, the legal term, in loco parentis, in the place of the parent, right, when children are in attendance at the schools. But teachers working in classrooms are now positioned not only in the place of the parent legally as figures of temporary authority, but are also often charged with acting in place of the kids' parents. Insofar as we have become what Robert Bly once called a sibling society, actively parenting adults often lack the confidence in their own authority, something that children, although they would not admit it, need and desire. Finally, more and more mothers remain in a state of protracted adolescence alongside their offspring in these families. It is a strange sight, but so it is for many would-be parents in the world of the vanishing adult. And what of the children? Boys and girls have television and internet access to what is advertised as representations of adults and adult situations that I term irreal. It's a real word, but what I mean by it is representing a hypothetical reality with respect to what real people do. Designed as entertainment, after all, what children see on TV is often mistakenly understood as equivalent to what older human beings do behind the curtained windows of apartments and houses. So given the changes in parenting I've described, many children now try to raise themselves and each other, and sometimes even their parents, something they're not capable of doing. To this account, we must add that our children are maturing physically much earlier than only 3 generations ago, even while recognition of them as competent citizens is deferred ever longer. Not to speak of later entry into the job market. Our children are awash in an endless flow of information and novelty, and novelty is brought to them with the click of a mouse. But they lack the skills to judge the meaning and discriminate the quality of what they see and hear, and to relate it to their own psychological reality, what the film maker Gus Van Sant has called their own private Idaho. Last of all, the education for gender identity children receive has become more confused and confusing by the day. Boys and girls hear influential elders seriously using terms such as female masculinity or gender neutrality, even before they have understood the differences between the sexes. May have gotten myself into trouble here, but that's all right. I'll be leaving in 3 days. Under the sign of the circumstances described, the nuclear family is passing away. Something different, another living social institution will and must soon replace it. Problem is, we have not yet invented it. Perhaps it will turn out to be like Dr. Frankenstein's creature, alive but dangerous, seemingly human but lacking a soul. With any luck, it will be a beneficial institution. We will see. As we know, cultural changes now occur with great rapidity. The predecessors of the nuclear family, the village, the extended family, were slow to develop, and in due course were replaced by the nuclear family as the fundamental institution of childrearing. By contrast, whatever is to replace it will have to be hastily devised and ready for occupancy long before it is habitable. The new child-rearing institution will resemble nothing that we know, as far as I can say. It will not be the village again or an elaborate kinship system such as anthropologists have found in pre-Western cultures. Such groupings are made up of a few hundred individuals. By contrast, the tiny nuclear family of 3 or more, perhaps up to 9 or 10, evolved to work within very large populations, such as crowded urban centers and sprawling networks of small cities and towns. The new child-rearing institution will have to function not only in these vast communities, but also in the global community of instantaneous telecommunication and the World Wide Web. What will be its features? What is to succeed the nuclear family? Well, it will have to be intergenerational. Experience still counts for a great deal, especially when the period of a young person's relative social helplessness and economic ineffectiveness and dependency is longer than at any other time in history. I believe its fundamental relational mode will be mentorship. Relationships between the young and the older will be similar in some respects to what goes on between a student and his teacher, a young athlete and his coach, a client and his therapist, perhaps, and most notably between a father and his son. I'm aware that some have countered that the nuclear family is surely in crisis, but not about to expire. Instead, they say it is only in need of shoring up and repair in order to adjust to changing times. Well, while we wait to find out who's correct, there are consequences of its undeniable weakening as a social institution that we must attend to without delay. Children who would dwell in the household of the fundamental child-rearing institution of our time are experiencing significant levels of unease. It is no longer an emotionally and psychologically safe place to be for many of them, even if it is equipped with 5 bedrooms, 6 bathrooms, and an in-house fitness center and swimming pool. And for reasons I will now provide, among our children, boys, I believe, are more dramatically affected by its transformation than their sisters and girlfriends. So, to the third part, how boys are affected by changes in the dynamics of the nuclear family. Well, as a psychologist, I'm interested in the effects of social change on individuals at the level of their experience. Without understanding what motivates behavior, which is the focus of most study research, that is, without understanding experience, it seems to me talk about behavior lacks context, and we appreciate little of what it means. Behavior can be very misleading, right? So you see someone push someone walking on the sidewalk between 2 cars and think, oh, this person's being aggressive towards this person, right? But then you see that a cart's coming down the sidewalk that this person didn't see, and the push was meant to save the person's life from being run over. Behavior does not always reveal its intentions or its meaning. So the focus on experience is what I would say is essential here. Here today, I can only point to one area of concern to me as a clinician and teacher who spent 40 years working with boys and young men, and that is the disappearance of the father. I take this to be the single most unique change, important change, in the child-rearing institution that has especially affected boys. You have already inferred that the disappearance of the father and the imminent collapse of the nuclear family imply each other. Just how, I'm trying to figure out and trying to understand, but certainly they do imply each other. Through the baby boomer generation, a father was on the scene unless he had died in war, on the job, or from illness. Although he was often away for long periods of the day at a job, he rarely abandoned the household, even when it came to be overseen by the mother in the early part of the 20th century. As a consequence, and it did, by the way, the head of the family subtly shifted from the person of the father to the mother. Nevertheless, they remained in contact and formed a compact of support. Well, as a consequence of easier opportunities for divorce and the promotion of new personnel arrangements in the family mentioned earlier, 2 out of 3 boys are now being parented without a father in their household for the crucial first decade of life. This means a boy will miss the presence of a consistent model for manhood and masculinity. Bereft of the stabilizing presence of a father, many boys now run away or hide from this situation. Many clinicians, as clinicians know, many hide inside themselves. Not the clinicians, the boys. The presence of the father is important for boys, especially given their proneness to excess, which, as you have heard, I take to be a gift and not a liability. But the missing father is of most consequence to a boy when he is learning how to love. That is, to take the initiative for the first time to form a deep relationship with another human being. Now, this is a bit of new thinking on my part, and I'd be interested to hear what you all think about this in response to this. It betrays a little bit of my psychoanalytic background, but it also speaks to something that I think that whole tradition omitted. Again, something here is important for a boy in relation to his father. And as I've said, it is in his learning how to love. That is, to take the initiative to form a deep relationship with another human being. You're wondering about the mother. I'll tell you a second, where I think this important person is too. This, I believe, occurs in relation to the father. This is, I believe, an overlooked developmental milestone in male psychology. A boy learns he's lovable from his mother, but he learns how to love, to take the initiative in the relationship with his father, whom the boy must love and therefore like in order to want to be like him, that is, in order to identify with him. Remember, when a boy returns to his mother in the closeness of their relationship is not love, but gratitude. What happens with his father, however, constitutes his first attempt at loving another human being, one that he initiates. A legacy of Freudianism, the boy's much discussed rivalry with his father, with his dad, I take to be a secondary phenomenon. It's there, but I think it has been much overstated, overemphasized. So, 2 fundamental aspects of a boy's life as a male human being are at stake here: his identification with the male and his capacity to love. Both depend for their optimal development on the presence of the same man during boyhood. This is what a father is for, and what fathering means in the setting of the nuclear family. If a boy's love for his father is returned, the process of identification proceeds more or less smoothly. There will always be snags and uneven turns in the course. If the father's response is perceived as lukewarm, and the father does not love his male offspring in return, there can be no accomplished sonhood. Again, that's a real word, as it turns out. On the other hand, as the recent very, very moving documentary, I hope you all have a chance to get on the equivalent of Netflix here, if you can find it. It's called The Human Experience. I can give you some information about this documentary. This particular documentary, just out in last fall, very moving documentary shows, even if the father's response, who's there, is perceived as lukewarm, and the father does not love his male offspring in return, and even if he's not a very good father and might even be a lousy father and a harsh father, a boy has a better chance of learning how to love another human being than if the father is not there. In other words, sometimes a bad father may be better than no father at all. Well, the consequences of not having a father on the scene are more extensive for a boy than for his sister, I would claim. This follows from other features of development mentioned earlier. But let us not forget that a relationship with the father is also essential for a girl's development, now not for purposes of identification, but as a template for relationships with men later in life. For a girl who's learning how to love another human being, the father serves as a living bridge between parent and man, male. This is a complex and fascinating topic in itself. Today we'll limit ourselves to considering the situation for boys. So, for a brief critical time when he separates from his mother and individuates, then the boy is psychologically homeless as he tries to understand why his mother no longer encourages him to cling to her. Separation and individuation, these are two well-known terms from psychology of early development, written about chiefly by Margaret Mahler. Separation and individuation are liberating, and they are necessary for his independence as a person. But to a boy having most of the threats of continuity of the early dual unity with his mother cut, this feels like being rejected. The boy temporarily feels at sea and somewhat alone. But this is where the father must be prepared to move toward his son to catch him, existentially and emotionally. The sense of abandonment a boy experiences is inevitable, but in the nuclear family, the father has been there to step into the breach, to be perceived as prepared and willing to claim a mother's boy as a father's son. And when the father is not there, what about that? And this being increasingly the situation, a boy will improvise. Will he turn back to his mother and attempt to resume that symbiotic, quasi-symbiotic relationship with her as he had known as an infant? Well, if he does, he might temporarily feel secure again, and some boys do this, but at the price of having lost most of his newly gained autonomy. In this scenario, he may identify with aspects of his mother's role and perhaps with features of her way of presenting, her habitus, her way of presenting herself as a female. He may consciously and deliberately modify the way he comports himself, the way he moves, the way he acts, as a body, as a person, and the body and the person really can't be separated, to confirm this. Alternatively, he may find compromising his autonomy and independence unacceptable, and will look around for someone else to turn to other than his mother. That individual may be another female. In many fractured families, the grandmother often plays such a role. This has been the case in many fatherless African American families in the States and among indigenous people in Australia. As I poignantly learned during my second visit here 2 years ago, and perhaps I'll have an opportunity to tell you about a talk I gave in Newcastle, in which we had the participation of 4 homeless boys from a group near Newcastle who came to be part of a panel, and heard one of them, who was an indigenous Australian, speak in response to me, totally upstage me, and talk about the absolutely crucial relationship that he had, the life-saving, psychologically life-saving relationship that he had with his grandmother. In any case, or a boy might instead approach another male. This might be a grandfather, an uncle, an older brother. Often it is one of his mother's transient boyfriends, or it is a man outside of the household, perhaps a male teacher, a coach, or a mentor. Of course, there are now also many choices among virtual fathering figures. Most are found on television. Sports heroes, including the very popular superstars in football, are eagerly chosen. But they are not real to him. And tragically, boys know this, even while hungrily looking to them as models. The surrogate father figure is no longer likely then to be someone with cultural prestige in the community, as he might have been in the past, a minister, priest, a rabbi. If he is to be someone with that sort of status, he's more likely these days to be a school counselor or a psychotherapist. But in that case, he is someone who has been assigned to the boy by his mother, his pediatrician, or a school official, because unusual personality features have already become apparent in the boy. The availability of such a father substitute will be based on a determination then of illness, of psychopathology, right? And not on the basis of something positive. It may be the only option, but I think we need to remember that it carries with it that shadow of there's something wrong with me. That's why I have to see this man to somehow help. What the mother or expert has seen in boys who have grown up without fathers is what James Herzog has termed father hunger. These will be its signs. Depression, often disguised as irritability, particularly in adolescence, in the post-pubertal years, but also in younger boys. Uncertain or ambivalent self-identification as a boy. Problems with impulse control and acting out. Generalized lack of engagement in social life. Difficulty in forming new relationships. Wariness about intimacy with another person. Aversion to being touched, physically and emotionally. An overall sense of fearfulness and consequent absence of initiative. Lack of assertiveness, perhaps compensated for by bullying, aggressive behavior. Lack of a sense of competence. Difficulty cooperating with authority figures and the dozen, and even estrangement from what we used to call the numinous, or a sense of the spiritual, a sense of the divine in the world. While boys are eager to tell us about their experience of father hunger and much more, we all must listen, but understand that boys often require a special kind of listener. So I move toward my conclusions here. They want to tell an older male about their disappointment at not having had a father to love and be loved by in return, someone to emulate and identify with. Here, a male age mate will not do, nor will a woman, not because she is female, but because she is associated in the young male's mind with his mother, from whom he has had to be liberated in order to move on to individuation. If learning to love is a son-father transaction that in fact defines the males involved as son and father, respectively, and if this experience serves as the template for a male's way of loving in general, and this will include his way of loving women, in addition to desiring them sexually as he gets older, when a boy has missed having a father, he will tell us about how he is strangely unable to feel anything at all for anyone. This carries over to his minimal engagement with ideas and causes. It is more than curiosity that draws one to like to do certain things, to passionately love doing something and to be committed to working at it means relating to it and treating it as though it were a person. Consider the transitional objects we see in some boys' relationship with, for example, their skateboard or a guitar. These objects are the precursors of their first crushes. I could tell you a story of a mother who brought a son to see me. He was doing poorly in school. And the short of the story is that he sat there quite quietly with his skateboard between his knees and didn't have much to say about school and how he was doing in school, though that's why he was presumably there. Well, all of his investment was in his skateboard. He was in love with it. This was his partner for a while. And so it serves that purpose for a period of time. Eventually, I counseled the mother to give that a chance to work itself out. He was a bright kid. He had done well earlier, but he was in a period now when he was not doing well. He'll catch up. And when she went out, I had a few minutes with him, and the only intervention, if I can call it that, was I said, your mother's worried that you're not going to do well in school. By the way, are you going to put your next YouTube, your next skateboard exhibition on YouTube? And he was okay with that. But in any case, these relationships with things are precursors for relationships with people and with ideas, I would suggest. Boys are literally dying to tell us about their sense of hopelessness in not having been welcomed by someone whom they want to be like. That's the father. This, by the way, is an ancient practice carried out by fathers with their sons, but one that cannot take place when there is no father. It is obvious that a boy does not choose his natural parents. But what if there is no father to choose him as his son and elevate the boy to sonhood? As I've said, boys feel safer when they know there is someone present to moderate their excesses of emotion and movement. In the nuclear family, this is the job of the father. Research going back to the 1930s by women and men has shown that he is an irreplaceable person in the psychological economy of the boy's life. Much of this research has been systematically ignored, and that's an interesting question. Why? Why has it been ignored? Of course, a boy will act the rebel at any attempt at containment of his behavior, but he will let us know in his own way that he felt better knowing that someone was supporting his efforts at self-control. Older boys now tell us of their uncertainties about what a man is supposed to be and do in the 21st century. In our time, when the genders are purportedly losing their distinctiveness, I don't think that's the case, but that's what I'm hearing in the media. A young man is nevertheless expected to learn how to act as a male with intimate female partners. We hear not only of the decline of males, as Lionel Tiger terms it, but of their obsolescence and eventual disappearance, as in the British geneticist Brian Sykes' words, Adam's curse. And yet, reproduction still works the same way it has since before we graduated from being only animals to living in community as human beings with animal needs and desires. And things will continue to work this way until technology makes something else possible, advertising makes it desirable, and above all, our culture deems it desirable. I'm skeptical that especially the last part, that will happen. In the real world, so far, and still, being a young male means being embodied in a certain way. Both parents confirm the givenness of a boy's inner sense of being male. but it is the father who shapes that status in a nuanced way to reflect a given culture's unique social practices. Without a father, a boy is essentially estranged from his culture. No one would deny that such feelings of alienation are endemic among boys, everywhere. I've painted a grim picture of the situation of boys in a time of the evanescence, the disappearance of the nuclear family. I've looked at the situation from the perspective of the missing father. Is my picture overdrawn? I don't think so. The precarious situation so many boys find themselves in is reflected in it exactly, I think. You have not heard me speak of a crisis, however, because that implies a turning point. We have yet to bring the situation of boys' lives to such a turning point. I hope that work of the kind we're engaged in here today and will encourage such a shift. It will take courage. Later today, I will detail what I believe we must do for boys, make some recommendations, but in anticipation and conclusion, let me just offer a few suggestions. Those of us who have sons or work with boys and young men in the classroom or consulting room must let them speak. We should not presume to speak for them. Rather than standing in for them, we must make way for them. This does not preclude standing up for them without further delay. Speaking for and making way for reflect two very different forms of concern. The former is merely custodial and effectively proscribes boys' freedom to tell us about their experience without taking into consideration our expectations for them. By contrast, making way, I think, is liberating. Part of bringing matters to a turning point will mean admitting the imminent collapse of the nuclear family as a viable institution, even if its structure is formally preserved and its pastimes continue to be observed in a mechanical way. Laws continue to be in play that control it. We must envision what will replace it and determine who will have a major part to play in the new institution. I once wrote that boys are all men's sons. Boys are all men's sons. This suggests that men will have the pivotal role in the tragedy of the missing father. Here I speak directly as a man to the men in the audience. Our own silence must be broken if we expect our boys to speak. For this to happen, men must have speaking parts once again. The not-so-great male silence, decades long, now must end. Before men can talk to their sons and other boys, they must speak to each other again. Men used to talk to each other, and still do in many cultures, without the benefit of large amounts of alcohol or the background noise of a crowded sports stadium. Men must also talk to the women in their lives, especially the mothers of their sons, even when they are living apart. Men must be willing to take the time to sit down and wait with boys and listen to them when they are ready to speak. Recall how cautious Felix is about getting close. Well, given our patience and steadiness, however, he eventually draws close and starts to purr. I have learned that boys also want to tell of their anger about our silence as men. So far, no one has spoken up on their behalf loudly enough or long enough to get the attention of society. Boys are enraged by this. But with no one real to be angry at, their rage is usually diffuse. It is then directed broadly at society as a whole, that is, at anyone they encounter. Rarely, although these instances have been spun out of proportion to their occurrence by the media, the act of killing is directed at targeted individuals. Much more often, the rage is directed precisely and with deadly accuracy at themselves. The suicides of boys and young men now occur at a rate of 4 to 6 times greater than that among girls between the ages of 12 and 25. Sometimes the execution occurs over an extended period of time in chronic self-destructive behavior. Today, for those capable and prepared for post-secondary education, not attending college is a form of a socioeconomic suicide, just as serious to the well-being of a boy as the overuse of alcohol. By the way, I have the impression that the psychological target of the suicidal act in young males is often the boy in himself. Recall that most male suicides occur in the late teen years and early 20s, when the boy is supposed to be put to death psychologically, to be replaced by the man. It is also possible that sometimes the object of his self-directed aggression is the man he sees himself not wanting to become, especially when this figure is deemed toxic by culture. In a time of the missing father and the ineffective family, we must encourage boys to seek us out. It's particularly important for us men. This is an occupational hazard when working with boys. It can be an occupational hazard. But eventually, most of them will make contact and tell us, often with just a glance or simple action, of their appreciation for our understanding that we stood by during long periods of monosyllabic replies and feigned disinterest in our concern. When they do feel at home with us, expect to see a boy's voracious appetite for the father. Boys are all men's sons. That is, every man is a boy's father if the boy needs him to be. This would be in the spirit of the first mentor, the name of somebody, who was charged by Odysseus, you remember from Greek mythology, to care for his son Telemachus when Odysseus left Ithaca to fight the Trojan War. Men now leave for different reasons, separated or divorced from the family they helped engender. But boys remain behind alone all the same. If we mentor boys, what they have to offer us will freely flow. A flair for innovation, liveliness, playfulness, and pure possibility. A generation of such boys just might help us recover aspects of our humanity that we seem to have lost. That's another story for another time.